Hi, friends. Welcome to the Showing Up podcast. I'm your host, Lynsey Dyer. Here, it's my intention to encourage you to follow your weird, do the thing, even if you suck at it, and fully show up for this one wild and precious life, even if it isn't always easy to show up. This podcast is a very special conversation in a direction I've never taken it.
People have to lead with their courage, and they have to just know that the beginning is going to be hard, but that the benefits of what you create for other people to also feel free is tremendous.
I met Favianna Rodriguez at Mountain Film in Telluride. That's where this interview was recorded. Favianna is a multimedia artist and an activist whose work is rooted in queerness, migration, gender equality, and criminal justice. Her image of a monarch butterfly entitled "Migration is Beautiful" went viral and remains an iconic image of the immigrants' rights movement. That's right, I'm reading this because it deserves all the respect it can get. In this interview, she talks about growing up in Oakland as a child of immigrants during the height of the crack epidemic, why we should be teaching our children sex positivity, and why she always knew she'd be an artist, and eventually how she found her powerful, unapologetic voice in activism. It was an honor to speak with someone who's grown up so differently than me and has made the impact that she has with her voice and her art. This is your disclaimer warning you about adult themes. We will talk a lot about explicitly sex and the female body. So if there's little ones present, I do believe they can handle it, but that's up to you. Enjoy the episode, friends. This one's for you. Okay, dropping in. Welcome to Telluride.
Thank
Welcome
you.
to the mountains. You said you've hung out in Peru at high elevation in Cusco?
In Cusco.
Is which part of your family, or is it both sides?
Both of my parents are from Peru.
But you were born in the States.
In Oakland, California.
So I love to hear people's stories. So how did you become this incredible force? Where did it come from?
Yeah. So I was raised in a neighborhood in East Oakland that was very poor, and that there was just a lot of violence. You know, it was the crack cocaine epidemic was ending. It was the 80s. Oakland was considered one of the homicide capitals in the country throughout the 80s and the 90s. Today, it's one of the most gentrified places in the country. But back then, it was just a really dangerous place. And my parents, because they're immigrants, their ideology was really around me getting educated and going to college.
Are there other kids in your family?
Yes, I have a little brother.
Okay, so you're the
younger
firstborn.
brother. I'm the firstborn. And they just really did their best to protect me from, making sure I didn't join a gang, and just really focused on my schooling. But it was also a very kind of strict upbringing. So growing up in an environment like that, I just knew it was totally wrong. It was just wrong that I was a kid and I didn't feel safe, or that I would see gang fights, or that I would know that my girlfriends were getting raped. I mean, really. And I just felt a sense of injustice. And I also, because I was a really smart kid, I would be in all the AP and advanced classes, but I was usually the only kid of color in those classes. And my peers, especially in high school, I just saw them get tracked in another way. And so I just...
And do you think it was generally because of how they looked, not because of how they were performing?
Yes, it was really clear. It was very clear. I was very aware of racism since a very young age, because it was just so blatant. So I became an organizer in high school. I organized the first Latino club in my high school. And I just early on learned that you have to speak up. And so I walked out my high school, I think it was in 1994, and I walked out my whole high school. We were protesting the expansion of prisons, because California used to be one of the number one states in prison.
In high school.
Yeah.
So where, this is what I wanted to wait until the podcast to ask you. Where did you get that unafraid. You seem to be unafraid. You're unapologetic. You don't mind making other people feel uncomfortable, calling things out.
I think that actually happened after I had an abortion. Because even though I was socially active, I still was really active around things that it was safe to be active around. And I still was, like dating mostly men who just were not treating me right. And I didn't have the language or the ability to speak up for myself.
So you're saying at that time in high school, during the walkout, everyone agreed with that. So it was a popular move.
It's different than actually standing up for yourself when you are in an intimate relationship. Absolutely. I actually think a lot of times activism is something that people do that's very outside of themselves in a way. I mean, they're passionate about it, but it's a lot harder to challenge interpersonal things.
Absolutely.
So I got a full ride to UC Berkeley, which is one of the best universities in the country. And when I got there, I was active again. But 3 years into being in college, I got pregnant. And I was always a very sexually active kid. So this is also an important thing to understand, is that even though my family was very much about close your legs, don't get pregnant, and because my family was so strict, I mean, literally I would go to school and then I would have a math tutor and then I would go to engineering camp on the weekends. My parents were just really about keeping me occupied so that I wouldn't have time to like go hang out with the wrong people. But even then I found a way to move around that. To the point sometimes where my mom would like cut up my clothes because she felt I was dressing slutty. I was not even dressing slutty, but it was like my only way to resist.
It was your rebellious act against your
that structure. When I got to college though, and I was finally in an environment, I lived in a co-ed dorm, not a dorm, sorry, a co-op. I realized I just started to begin to feel more free because I was for the first time not living with my parents. And then I met someone who I really thought was in love with me. And then I got pregnant. And I've always known I don't want to have a kid. Like, I just know. Just like I've known that I want to be an artist. I've known that I don't want to be a mom. And so I knew that I wanted to have an abortion because I was just like, I'm not going to have a mom at fucking 18 years old. So when I told my partner, he disappeared. And I never saw him probably for another like 8 or 10 years. But what it made me realize is just that even though I was this empowered person kind of externally, the decisions I was making for myself were really poor. And that's an interesting point. Yeah. And do you see that across the board in other activists? I think that for women, it's actually really hard to begin to point things at yourself. And I realized that for years, I had been having kind of like abusive relationships. I was being in relationships with people that didn't give a shit about me, even though I thought that they did. And so when I had my abortion,
and you were doing all this work,
I was doing all this work to improve the world,
right?
But a lot of it didn't have to do with gender, and it didn't have to do with really
anything that touched you
touched me, but also things like mental health or what it means to grow up in a violent community, even though I was not the victim of sexual abuse or I was sometimes a victim of violence, but I wasn't, not to the degree that other people were. I just think that it made me realize that I couldn't let people fuck with me anymore. And I really had to be honest about who I was and have like a very well-rounded approach. And around that time, I started really actively doing art in 2001. And in 2004, my career really started growing. But I still didn't tell anyone about my abortion. I think I was just still working out the language, and I was trying to, find myself. And I was in a really long-term relationship with an older artist who was way more famous than me. And by the end of our relationship in 2007, I was with him for 7 years. I just was more well-known than him. And I realized just that one is that I wasn't no longer into men in the same way, but just that I realized how much patriarchy had shaped all of my decisions, and that so much, there's just like men and the way they treat women is so, this negative way of treating women is so normalized. And when I got out of that my relationship,
can you just talk about that for people? Patriarchy can mean so many things. Can you be specific in this?
Is that men control the world. they control culture, they control political systems, and there's a normalized way of treating women.
That's just the
women
way it is.
Women are highly objectified. Yeah, it's also just the way it is.
And we just buy into it because
we just buy into it, and
that's the way it is.
Because that's the way it is, and that's also what we see on TV. And it's just this narrative of like you have to wait for someone to come find you, and that this right person's gonna find you, and that. And actually, to me, it's so ingrained that I think it's actually rare to find men who genuinely 100% believe in the equality of women and who actually treat women like full human beings, like not just like an object. And so
and not to any fault of their own other than.
No, this is because the system they've inherited.
Exactly.
And honestly, I don't think they've learned.
And us as women as well.
Of course, women uphold it as well. Women enable men to do this. But I think for me, like after my...
So what brought you to the awareness of it?
Well, because I was realizing just that how much work when it comes to political and social transformation, there's so much that has to be done on the inside. And I think that I was doing a lot of that for I would say until about 2012 when I finally came out about my abortion. And I realized, even I've always been sex positive. Since 2004, I started exploring polyamory. But I just really began to know that...
Wait, what does sex positive mean?
Sex positive means that, my parents were sex negative. They used pain-oriented narratives like, don't get pregnant, don't have a kid. Like, basically, close your pussy out.
Like using fear to try to control that part of you, to keep yourself...
The reality is I wish if I would have kids... I would actually I would tell my kids about masturbation. I would encourage my daughters especially to explore themselves, to like know their body. I mean, I didn't know what a clitoris was until I was in my 20s. That's not the sex education that I received, and I went to very good schools, but it was all about a reproductive education. So I think that when I was able to come out, I also was able to really realize that not only did I want it to be about the right to have an abortion, I wanted to be about pussy power. I actually wanted to really embrace all my power as a human being and as a woman. And it had a lot to do with my own body pleasure. It has a lot to do with me doing whatever I want, like being topless or experimenting with drugs or running my own business, being an entrepreneur. I just think that we give men so much freedom to do anything, and they are it's just encouraged. And with women, we're so discouraged. We actually are almost forced to fit in this very particular narrative. And I think that when I came out about my abortion and then actually really began to come out as queer and understand that I just I don't want to be a part of a patriarchy. I don't like heteronormativity. It just never really was that's not what I was about.
Can you define queer for me?
Yeah, queer is that you are not heteronormative, basically. And queerness, I think...
So it can mean a lot of things.
Yes, it means a disruption of a set of really performative behaviors that are based on a binary identity around gender, right? Which is that there's a male and there's a female, and these two interact in a certain way. And when you have sex, it's about a dick inside a vagina, and that's the correct way to have sex. Queerness is a disruption of all of that, and it really means that two people can connect in a way that they want to that will disrupt this heteronormative way. So it could mean that...
So it's still an act of rebellion against something else.
Oh, yeah, totally. And it also embraces just everything that is viewed as wrong in our society around sex. So it could be that, I'm with a very, very feminine, male-identified cis man who wants to be more feminine and who prefers to just have sex in a way where they're not dominant, for example.
Sure.
Or it could also, of course, mean to women having sex. It could be me connecting.
It's anything against the norm.
Yeah, it's really anything that disrupts the norm, because anytime you are not in a heteronormative relationship, you are seen as wrong.
It's a statement.
Yeah, yeah.
That seems to be everything about you, and you have I think it's just incredible. And I'm just, did you just come out like that? It seems like you did. It's like you have a statement.
I think it came out of feeling very repressed, and also, frankly, just being I don't like to use the word lucky, but I am so glad that I never faced sexual assault, because I could have. I was in many situations.
So you're speaking on behalf of those that you did witness in some
and
capacity.
I witnessed it, and I also, my friends did, and I saw how it broke them.
Yeah.
And I also, I definitely experienced, child abuse is child abuse. I definitely got hit by my mom in a really awful way. But I wasn't terrorized by my father or my mother in a way that many of my peers were. And I think that the reason, one of the things that makes me the way I am is because I've also witnessed a lot, and I've always felt, I felt a need to speak out about it. And I guess my voice has just gotten stronger. Because when I had as a kid, I was rebellious, but my mom slapped that out of me real quick. Because that's not the kind of girl she wanted.
Right.
And it was really hard to grow up in that environment. I mean, I had such a tough childhood. In fact, I had to actually leave Oakland because there came a point when I just got tired of fucking being around guns. I got tired of the fact that I was 12 years old and that I remember being in a car that got shot at, and I'm like, I'm fucking 12 years old. This is not okay. This is not normal. So I asked my mom to send me to Mexico City. I was like, Mom, I can't. I feel like I'm trapped here. I feel like I am trapped in this hood that will never see my full potential. So when I got to go to Mexico City and see the work of Frida Kahlo and also honestly be away from my parents and have to be a grown-up. But then when I was in Mexico, I didn't belong either, because they were, they treated me like an American kid. Even though I was Latina and I spoke Spanish, I was still an outsider. So I think that it's really been that I've been an outsider many times, and that there has been so many attempts to repress my voice. And I feel like that when in my 30s, I have really become more and more an emancipated woman. I mean, I'm going to be 40 this year. I definitely think it's been something over my last 10 years where I'm just really okay, I'm on a journey to really find my true self and my true voice. And I just think that, this is what patriarchy does. It really, the way that girls start to be affected from the moment they're girls around how they should behave is something that it takes us a long time to unlearn. And I've been actively unlearning it, and as I unlearn it, I just feel more courageous to be myself, and I feel like that's just going to be growing. So I try to surround myself with women and queer folks and trans women who are also just don't give a fuck, because I think that that is, to me, I really want to be free. I have just witnessed how awful it is to not be free, that I really want to be free.
So how has art shown you a capacity to change things? And what are some examples of actual change?
Art is the best fit for me, and I know now I understand why I wanted to be an artist since I was a kid, because I always had something to say. And because I was a girl and I was growing up in a very strict culture and household, as a kid, you don't have that lot of power. Your parents cut that power off really quick. But art was a way to express myself and to actually even mark my existence and make a mark on the world. Because when you make art, you're making a record of something, and you're actually creating something into the world that will live beyond you. And so when I would see, Frida, and, because Frida was dead by the time I was born, and I would just witness how I could feel her story, and I could know what she created felt so powerful to me. Because, when I was growing up and I would tell my teachers, my mostly white teachers, that I wanted to be an artist, they would introduce me to Picasso or Rembrandt or Matisse. I mean, I know so many white male artists. And
we all do. I went to art history.
Yeah. And
Frida was literally the only female that we learned about.
Yeah, and maybe Georgia O'Keeffe.
Oh, right.
Maybe. And that's and so I just think that I don't want that to be the situation for the next generation. I want to be able to create something so powerful that when children get to think to themselves, oh, I want to be an artist, and they get to see role models who look like them. I didn't have that. It's very important to me to then do something that will leave a mark on this world. And I don't think, you know, music, I tried music. I learned how to play the piano since I was really young. I actually had to clean my piano instructor's house so that I could pay for my lessons. But I think visual art was really what was the right
that's
thing
fascinating, because it sounds like you said, you're an AP everything. You know, it sounds like you could have done anything.
Yeah, I've always been an overachiever. Actually, my parents were told to put me into the gifted thing.
I'm just curious, could you have been a scientist? Could you have been
I think I could have
engineer?
actually. I feel like and you know, now when I get very passionate about certain things, and I love working with scientists, because one thing that scientists have taught me, and especially in really addressing climate change, but just addressing what's happening to the planet, is that human beings have two ways of understanding the world, what's happening to them. We have science and we have art. That is how we make sense of the world. And so I love the arts, and I love science because it's like our sister in a way. It's that humans always have to be making sense of the world. And even now, as I'm working more with women in Hollywood, I realize I want to make movies. And so I think that for me, I'm always going to live in the creative realm, because I believe in the power of the story. I believe that people need to be seeing films or visual art or symbols that will help them reimagine the world. So I'm going to stay in the cultural sector, but I do feel like I can do anything. I feel like it's really a matter of just applying my brain to it and figuring it out. And I love the idea of reinventing myself. I mean, I don't want to be a visual artist forever. I really do want to get into other kind of narrative spaces.
So what would be the narrative that you would like to tell, or that you are telling?
I've been thinking a lot about creating a TV show about really that's based on my life, but that's about a young Latina girl who's like really, really smart and rebellious, and she's also slutty, and she also has a lot of really amazing intimate encounters that help her understand her body and what she likes. And she's also very curious about things, and you know, she experiments with all kinds of things. And she's also an entrepreneur, you know, because she runs
all things that we are not used to seeing.
All
in
the things
media,
you're not used to seeing.
In
oh yeah,
television.
no. I mean, we have not until a recent TV show came out on Stars. We have rarely seen like a sex positive Latina who like sleeps with whoever she wants to sleep with and is like polyamorous. We just haven't seen it.
I think all of us have always looked in media for reflections of ourselves, whether it was as we were growing up, even brunettes, or if you're a little chubby. I remember, you know, like I would literally flip through the channels trying to find examples of something I felt that I related to, like being a little bit chubby, or freckles, or and you always saw the skinny blonde girl get the boyfriends and get, you know, be the star of the show. And I remember how stressed I was to not see anything reflected back at me that I could relate to.
It's awful. It's actually it's
so you feel out of place since you're
and also it's really unattainable.
Exactly.
And especially body image. I mean, body image for girls is
can't
like
change
torture.
It.
It's a torturous thing to put girls through, and we do it. Our culture does it. I mean, even now we're having a national conversation on body image. It moves so slow though. It's still so slow. And I do think that, I mean, just imagine how many years you tortured yourself around how you look. It just feels
it takes so much energy.
It feels so unfair that that like half of the population is put through that.
More than half, because nobody looks like the people on the screens. And that goes for boys too. They don't have examples of what it is to be
and
a
imagine
healthy...
if you're queer, trans, or in a wheelchair, like
yeah. Okay, so anything else on the picture of the narrative that you'd like to see?
Yeah, I just think also that the problems, you always need conflict in a story.
Mm-hmm.
But the conflict would be, oh, that's so cool. I love the birdie is like cheering us on.
Have a voice, Raven.
The conflict that she would have wouldn't be, a fight with her boyfriend or something like that, or a fight with the girlfriend, or it wouldn't be her asking for a raise. It would be something more along the lines of her really trying to find a solution to a significant problem.
Love
or
it.
breaking open an investigation, or just really attempting to change things at a big level. So often the people doing that are white men in films.
Right.
I feel like it's really important to tell stories.
Yeah,
and right
so
now,
she would encounter and create a solution for a real world problem.
for significant problems.
Love it.
Yeah, and then because I also feel that the problems that some of these female protagonists create. I mean, I loved actually films like The Post, where you're talking about a woman who's in charge of helping shape significant national events.
And these stories have existed forever.
Of course they have.
But we haven't been hearing them.
Yeah,
And they
no.
haven't been projected or in media.
I loved Hidden Figures too. Just the importance of black women who were computers. I mean, that's the kind of, those are the stakes that I'm looking for. It's just that how we actually can transform the outcome of our future.
So tell me about the change you've been able to make through your physical art.
Yes. Well, it's been significant. I created the Migration is Beautiful butterfly, which today is one of the most popular images in the immigrant rights movement. And it's an image of a monarch butterfly that really speaks about the right of all living beings to migrate. Migration is a part of what we have always done as humans. To be human means to migrate. And so we live in very anti-immigrant times.
Absolutely.
And it's important to have symbols that help us think about a world without borders, but also really taking it back to the essentials of nature, which is that nature didn't create borders. We've always been migratory creatures. So that's one of them. A second one I'm really happy about is my pussy power imagery. And
that was you.
Yes, I've created. I started doing pussy power since 2012, and like slut pride, slut positivity stuff. I mean, now it's more normalized. I mean, you saw Janelle Monáe's video, but I've definitely been one of the artists most pushing that symbolism, and really thinking and focusing my art on the clitoris, especially because so much of my education around a pussy was around the vagina, and the vagina is not the pussy. The vagina is actually one part of the pussy. It's not the clitoris. Vagina and clitoris are actually located on two different parts of the vulva. And so I always am like, bothers me when people use vagina to talk about a vulva or a pussy, because I'm like, well, vagina is the only a space where something goes in or out, and your clitoris is actually the point of pleasure. It has 8,000 nerve endings compared to a penis that has 4,000 nerve endings. So clitoris has double the nerve endings. It is the only organ on the human body that is exclusively for pleasure, because that is not connected to other organs. Because even on a penis, the space of most pleasure is still connected to the shaft, which is still part of the reproductive organ.
So you're saying that our power is in how we can pleasure ourselves without needing anything else. Of
course.
Okay,
I think
that's
that
the message.
Biologically, if you have a clitoris, biologically, you have an organ that is a part of your body that is exclusively for pleasure. And it's not connected to
anything
the place
reproductive
where you have it's not in your uterus, it's not in your fallopian tube, it's not in your vagina. And so I think that the narrative we have around sex is so messed up, because essentially like penis vagina sex is held up as the ultimate,
right?
And we definitely don't include anal sex. We don't include anything else. We rarely talk about clitoral orgasms, and so I really wanted to celebrate the clitoris and the pussy specifically as a symbol of moving away from heteronormativity. And I don't necessarily, there are definitely women without pussies. I want to be inclusive of trans people. I really want to use the symbolism of the pussy as a symbol, as merely a starting point to have a conversation around how we can have more pleasure that is something that we can do for ourselves.
We can own it.
We can own it. And also even, I didn't start masturbating on my own until I was in my 30s maybe. And really knowing, because I didn't know where the clitoris was.
Wow.
And I didn't understand. And when I realized like just how powerful I can have an orgasm, but also to know I could have 2 or 3 orgasms and my orgasms can last a very long time, I just felt so
like you'd been missing out.
I felt empowered. I've been missing out, but also I just felt like, wow, I never got this education. And to know so many women who don't have orgasms and actually who experience pain through sex. You know, the data shows that most women having sex today in this country are having painful sex.
Do you know the statistic on that? Wow.
I don't, but it's a statistic. And most sex is painful, which means they're not enjoying it, which means they're just having sex to pleasure a man, and a man is going along with it, which means that male pleasure is definitely held up, hetero male pleasure, but female pleasure is not.
Interesting.
So for me, it's been very important to always have a conversation on play and pleasure, because I think that's what we do less. I think actually a lot of times women they don't want to go there because to go there actually requires that you really love yourself and you understand that you can pleasure yourself without anyone.
And it's around fun.
It's totally fun. Yes.
I think a lot of people maybe interpret the pussy power as something scary. They're angry and feminist, angry, man hating. But your message is absolutely not that. It's celebrating the power that you have on your own that's built in.
Yes,
as a female.
and also to really give yourself pleasure, because there's other scientific evidence. I think Naomi Wolf wrote a book about how clitoral orgasms create confidence. They actually create all these wonderful things in your brain.
It cleans your blood.
Yeah, you feel really good. I mean, I actually realized I felt so great, and I was just...
It's the equivalent of exercise.
Yeah, I felt high from it, and I was like, wow, I just feel so in my power.
Interesting.
And I would feel connected to the world. I mean, seriously, I would feel like just like, wow, like I am in my body. I feel my body. The other thing is that in this country, we numb ourselves. I mean, we have a highly medicated.
Absolutely.
People are medicated.
Always trying to get out of our bodies in every way.
So to be in your body, and that's, I think, the larger thing for me, is that you need to be in your body, and you need to take back your body, because when you're raised as a girl, you're taught that your body is actually not yours, and that you hate your body. You actually, a lot of girls hate their body.
Why would you say it's not yours? What do we taught?
Because the narrative we get is that you have to wait for the right man to come claim it, or come, pop your cherry or whatever, or for somebody to marry you, which, I mean, all this shit to me is just like, these are such poor narratives. The reality is most people in our country are getting divorced. And like this whole thing on like marriage is such a fucking construct. It's not the reality of how people interact. And actually the fact that a lot of overwhelming amount of marriages are falling apart tells us that we actually need new ways to have relationships, right? And so I think that all goes back to the body, right? Like and especially, if you're a person of color, if you're an immigrant, if you're a black person, your body carries PTSD. PTSD is carried on through generations. And so we have to understand DNA. Also, when you are a victim of sexual abuse, or your mom is, or your parents, all of that stuff is in your DNA. So to really take control of helping your body feel its best, I think is an act of resistance. And it is especially an act of resistance for women of color. And so that's really what I'm trying to promote is that that real freedom starts with ourselves, and that when we can model that, it's not just about, marching in the streets against these old ass white guys who control Congress. It's not just about that. Actually, a lot of this transformation has to happen within in order for us to actually break the cycle. We have to break the cycle. Like the cycle of my mom telling me I was a slut and like telling me all these negative messages. She continues the cycle that was passed down to her. Just like so many men, they continue the cycle of abuse. They treat women the way they saw their grandfathers or their fathers.
Yeah. It's not even their fault.
And violence against women is fucking normalized, and continues to be a problem today. It's because the cycle hasn't been broken, and the status quo hasn't been broken. In order to break the status quo, it's very hard to break the status quo, first of all, because when you speak out against the status quo, you get crushed.
Exactly.
You get crushed.
Yeah.
And so
that's what I admire so much about you. You are not afraid to put it out there.
Well, I know that it's actually, somebody explained to me, this astrophysicist explained to me that it's actually physics, that when you're trying to move a very heavy object, the hardest part is to push it at the very beginning. But once it's in movement, and it gets easier to push. So I recognize that the hardest part about disrupting the status quo is actually the initial disruption. And that's why wherever I go, I was just, for example, at a residency in Florida, at the Robert Rauschenberg residency, and I was there with a group of artists, mostly artists of color, and we were all artists who work against mass incarceration. So when I got there, I asked the staff, hey, is it okay if I, just take off my clothes and do a lot of my art nude? Because a lot of what I'm trying to do with my art, I need my body for it. I mean, I'm trying to do photography. I'm trying to be in the woods. I'm trying to just be free, go into the ocean. They said it's totally fine. And so I modeled that. I created an environment where I can just walk around with like my bush in the air and my tits out. And that created a disruption, but it happened really early on. And then you began to see other people also feeling okay with that. But to take the first step in doing that is like, you have to break it. You have to break that. Or you have to be the one, when you hear a man say some really, awful things, you have to be the one to say, no, that's actually not okay that you said that. It's not okay that you act like that. Or, you show up to an event and you see a panel and it's all men, that you have to be the one to get up and say, this is unacceptable. We cannot have a panel with all men anymore. This is not okay. And you need to change the panel.
What advice would you give to someone who's thinking about that, but they could potentially lose their job, or they could upset people in some way? Like,
I think that at this point, the tide is changing. I think that people need to be as loud as they can. Honestly, I think they need to speak truth to power. And that's what my speech was all about on yesterday at the symposium. Is I said, the more privilege you have, you need to use that privilege. You need to disrupt the systems, because they need to be disrupted, and there's other people behind you. I mean, no one would have thought that Hollywood would have changed, but it took one voice. It took Rose McGowan, or it took Rachel DeHollander to speak out against Larry Nassar. And then look at how many women followed. Right. It has to, people have to lead with their courage, and they have to just know that the beginning is going to be hard, but that the benefits of what you create for other people to also feel free is tremendous, and that we shouldn't underestimate that.
It's a huge reason why I wanted to talk to you, because I'm an artist, and I want to know how best to use my voice with also not ostracizing people.
And I think the fact that you're an artist, one, is like, on the one hand, you also have a lot of permission and space to actually be whoever you want to be, because as artists, we can create our own story. And also that I think as artists, we're always trying to figure out a way. Like, that's why we can do things, is because artists are always, they're never fully included. There's never like a linear path. So you always have to kind of figure out which way to go around. But I do think also that artists have the most impact, even more than some social change agents. Artists are so memorable. Yeah. And the things we do like live in people's hearts.
Can you give me any more examples? Because I need to hear those right now.
Yeah. So an example, let's see. There's a singer, Kathleen Hanna, who had a band named Bikini Kill, and also Decepticon, and then later the Julie Ruin. So Kathleen Hanna was a punk rock star, and she would go to these punk shows, and she was like, why is it all men? And she then created her own band. And when she would have her punk shows, she would realize that all the men were in the front doing their moshing, and the girls were in the back. So she said, no, girls in the front, men in the back, and you can't be harassing women in these punk shows. You should watch her documentary. It's called The Punk Singer. But what she did, and she was singing about sexual abuse, she was singing about things in punk that were never sang about. And she went on to become one of the greatest punk musicians. She's hugely active today against sexual abuse, against harassment. but she's an extremely amazing role model. I look to her. I look at James Baldwin, who was one of the first, just a black gay writer who really just talked about the fact that the creation of the Negro was actually created by white people, that white people are the ones who saw like a Negro and somebody who was black, and they created this story. Wow. And so he said, the fact, I'm a human, but you're the one who needs to
put this label on me.
You put this label on me, so you're the one actually with the problem.
Wow.
You know, he was an amazing thinker. Nina Simone, who, you know, just like broke all kinds of barriers. Of course, Frida Kahlo. In terms of athletes, I mean, Ali Reisman. Have you heard her testimony? Ali Reisman, the gymnast. Just go listen to her testimony on Larry Nassar and how she talks about a survivor army. Like, it's just, she's brilliant.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have fun of your show. Well, friends, I hope you're feeling inspired and powerful. 2020, here we come. Thank you so much for listening. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of this via my social channels, so share away. If you've got any inspiration from this conversation, give us a review on iTunes, spread the word, and be sure to subscribe. We've also set a Patreon account up where you can become a sustaining patron of the show and help us continue to share these conversations. If you'd like to become a Patreon, go to patreon.com/showingup. And or show up for a unicorn school. We have 2 trips this season, one to Jackson Hole and one to Alaska in March. Give some love to the unicorns of 2020 from our recent community edit highlighting some of the most talented up-and-coming talent of 2020, and or purchase a hat to support wildlife on the Unicorn Picnic website. Your shares with friends and support keeps all of this alive. Until next time, see you in the mountains, unicorns.